So we are clear about the JSON format and the JSON string and all these things, right? We are clear about it.
Yeah, correct.
Cool. So what is an API? Application Programming Interface, right? It's a full form of it. Let us take any application. We can say web application, right? When we see any of the web application, right? What we will be having? We'll be having a client, server, and database. So the combination of the client, server, and the database. So what we will be having in each is client is nothing but an interface seeing, you can say, browser. Generally, we will be accessing each and every web application with the help of browsers. And the server is all your logic will be built. Okay? And the database is to store all the data related to application, right? And if you see here, right, there will not be any interaction between client and database. There will not be any direct interaction between these two. It will be kind of client to server and server to database. So how it will go is the client is like where you will be doing all your actions and what you are seeing. And in case if you do any operation on top of this, it will communicate with the server. And if you are something is related to the data, and the server will communicate with a database. And your database will send the response back to the server, and server will send the response back to the client. So without knowingly in each and every application, right, we will be using this APIs, which means like we are not utilizing them, but whatever the actions we are going to perform, right, it will do an HR API call.
It means basically it's a two-way communication between
Yes.
client and server, right?
Yes. Client will do an API request or make an API request to server for any operations, whatever we want to do. So if you take the example of Amazon, right? So here it will be like when you are trying to hit something, right? Like to navigate to some different page, it will make an API call to your Amazon.com, Amazon.in server, and that will be navigated to a different page. And let us come back and let us go to any of the product. Even navigating to this, yeah, why this is language is always turning it out. So this will be displayed. Okay. And to display this product, or like in case if I click on add to cart, right? And it will interact with your database, even to display also to show you whether it is available in stock or out of stock, because the count and all these details will be maintained in your database. So what will happen is this particular web page will make an API call to the server, and server will query the database, and database will return some data, and that will be returned back to this page, and that will be displayed here. So in general applications, it will happen in this way. Okay, are we clear on this?
Yeah. So
So
basically what you mentioned, like double cross, client double cross database, what is that?
client will send a request to the server. Server
Hmm.
will query the database, and database will return the data to server, and server will in return respond to the API request of this particular application or this web page, and data will be displayed here based on the response received from the server.
Okay.
Okay. Server is nothing but your code, like it can be of C#, it can be of Python, or it can be of anything. Okay.
Yeah, got it.
Yeah. So in API automation, what we are going to do is what will bypass the client. So there will not be any concept of client. Whatever the API calls, generally the client is doing to the server, right? The same API calls the our robot is going to do. Okay. So here robot will make API calls to server, avoids client. See, whatever the UI automation we have, right? UI automation we will be doing on the client. And the client will make the API calls to server and it will return the value. And from there, we will be taking the data from your web browser or web page. Here, that will be done with the UI automation. And we can avoid this UI automation in case if the API details of the server are exposed or API is exposed to call explicitly. See, if your client is making the API calls, means like it's an implicit, like it is internal, and the client and the server are binded together, right? But here, in case if the API, the developer make that APIs to be available to make the calls, then we will be avoiding this UI automation and we are going to do the API. So in majority of the cases, if APIs are available, then we always use API instead UI automation. In other words, I can say the API automation is a proper replacement of UI automation or integration between two systems. API will help you to integrate two systems or two applications. The reason is why we all see, in case if the API is available, we will use the API instead of UI automation. Why? The reason is API will not change frequently, whereas UI changes frequently. So the UI will be changing, whereas the API is not going to change. Okay. And API possibility of low failures. UI possibility of high failures. Okay. So for that reason, in case if the APIs are available, we'll do the API automation. So let us forget about all these things, right? We covered a couple of automations. We covered Excel, we covered email, right? We covered these two automations, right? So what is there in these activities? Email, it is API call, right? Even Excel also internal API call. It's not external system, but we will be using the DLLs to integrate with that. And email is purely API, right? The backend code, whatever we have inside of our activities is API. It will be an API request. So without knowingly, we are using our APIs in a lot of places, but we are not using it directly. We are not using it directly. And we doesn't know that it is already doing an API. And not only with this, almost all the connectors. I say the connectors, we have a lot of connectors, right? We have Salesforce, we have Jira, we have ServiceNow, we have a lot of connectors in UiPath. All these are APIs, wrappers, API wrappers we call. And with the help of this API requests only, all these connectors were built. See, in case if you are having a connector to any external application, Excel is not an API. I agree, it is like kind of DLL, we will be using it. But in case if you are trying to access any application which is not installed on your machine, and you are having a connector activities, which means it is making an API calls. So what are the challenges we generally face? See, this is not a project challenges. Challenges in APIs is this may happen because of some firewall issues or security in your organization. So in case if, see, for API calls, right, we need to make the API calls outside of your company network, and some companies will have stringent security policies. Some calls may not happen. So for such a cases, right, specific to that call, we need to whitelist API endpoint, and in some scenarios port. We need to whitelist this, or else we need to use proxy server to make the API calls. So you will get, this question will be asked. So we have an API documentation, and when you are trying to do the automation, it is not working. What might be the reason? The reason will be it might be blocked in your organization security policies. So what you need to do is you need to whitelist the endpoint and port, else we need to use the proxy server to make the calls. And even this proxy can be done. How we will get to know the proxy servers? In case mentioned in API documentation. See, for any of the APIs and all, right, you will have a documentation, very clear cut documentation. So for example, let me go to Jira. So whatever the application you want, right, you just need to mention the application name and API documentation in Google. So you will be given to this. This is the API documentation, and you will be having all the details and all, and how to make, and you will get some examples of how we can make the API calls also, but it will be of different programming languages or somewhere or some other things, right? So for each and every application, if we have the API documentation, then only we can do that. So in API, what we will be having is the required parameters is endpoint. Endpoint is the required parameter, because endpoint is nothing but, I can say this is my endpoint, right, for this particular web application. And for this particular download Excel, right, it will be a different endpoint because this element or a hyperlink will be there. So the endpoint is nothing but the URL. Endpoint, we can say URL, where the API call need to be done for specific action or specific um, data to be retrieved. Whatever it might be, it will be an action for specific action. So we need to have the endpoint for making the API call. Okay. And the other is authentication. So there will be some APIs publicly available, like for applications which doesn't have any confidential data or a sensitive data or something, and those will be openly available, and you can directly make without any authentication. Okay. And there will be some APIs defined which will be accessible with username and password, like whatever in the web browser we are doing, right? Login is in password. In the similar way, you can use your username and password to make the endpoint. That we call it as basic authentication. Or in the basic authentication, it can be username, password, or API key. API key will be generated, and that will also be there in the API documentation only. So basic authentication, and here it can be username, password. These two we will be having for very less applications, and there is another which is OAuth. And for this, we need to have client secret, client ID, security token, username, and password. So you need to get all these details, and you will be having that details in your API documentation itself directly. If you if I come here, right, it is OAuth, and we have basic authentication. We have both. If I go to the OAuth and if I go to the basic authentication, right, here we have, see, this will be your user interface. Sorry, this will be your user interface, right? And the user will perform the data, and it will make all the calls, and two-way communication will happen. Request Jira data, response with unauthorized token. So you'll be having in this way, and configure private key pair. See, we need to generate the private key, and 1 second, we'll get to know here. Yeah, consumer key, name, public key. So this will keep on changing, but this is the static way of I'm saying, but from documentation you can see it, because auth 2, auth 1 will be there. This is auth 1 and this is auth 2, right? So we just need to go through our documentation and it will help us to understand. Okay. And in case if you go to the basic authentication, right, it is simple username, password. Nothing else is required. Okay. So these are much more required elements. And the other is depends on the API call we are making, right? We will be having a body, which is like request whatever we are doing. Okay. And this will also be in JSON format in majority of the cases. And the output which we are going to get is JSON. So these are the basic properties of any of the API. Okay. And what are the different types of API methods we have? See, we got about the APIs and what are the different methods of API methods. So when you are making the API request or API call to a server, what you are trying to do, whether you want to get some data from there, or whether you want to create a new data there, or whether you want to update the existing data, or whether you want to remove some data, right? So we will be having get, post, update, delete, patch, put. We will be having multiple types. Let me go to UiPath Studio. Me go you get you this. So we have post, put, patch, get, delete. Second, guys, just give me a moment. So we have all these methods. So get is to request for data. It will retrieve the data from the server, sends data to server. In return, it will send you the response. Can be of like some ID with which whatever the data you send to the server, right? It is stored, or success or a failure. So you will be getting it. Update is to modify the data, removes the data. Input and patch, I was also not clear about it. I never used, and even I never used delete. I never used um, like I used post and get in majority of the times. Even patch is also this patch is also to modify. Put is also to post. Okay, put is to completely replace. We are modifying the data, right? Like with update, but the put is to remove the existing content and it will post the new data. So patch is to modify, update. So let me go here. Let's remove it here. Here. Okay. Put is to replace the complete data. So these are the different API methods, and majority of the cases, right? You will be using only these two requests, and the others are not that much required. Okay. These are the different API methods. What are the different API types we have? Broader way, right? There will be two types of APIs, REST and SOAP. So what is the difference between these two and why we will be having these two? And why we have two? Yeah, sorry. So what are these?
So I can say basically, like let's say REST is basically work with the plain text, right? Let's say we have a HTML tag is there, we have a JSON is there, right? So through REST, I think we can do uh, different action that you basically mentioning earlier, right? Like we have a get method is there, okay,
Mm-hmm.
post method is there. So basically, we can read the data from the API, but we can't
Mm-hmm.
write the data uh, from the API, right? Through the REST API. Okay. Now coming to the SOAP. So SOAP is
Mm-hmm.
basically like SOAP only work with I guess SOAP only work with the XML format, right? So
Mm-hmm.
through SOAP basically we can perform both option, like we can read the data from API and we can write the data in the API as well.
See, all the methods, whatever we discussed, right? Those are supported by both the REST and SOAP. And one point which you mentioned is correct. SOAP supports only XML, whereas the REST supports XML and JSON. Okay.
So it means
Support.
basically we can read and write data from both the API type like REST or SOAP, right?
Yes. Yes. But this will have larger messages compared to the rest. Larger messages in the sense like if you have some CRM application, right?
Mm.
If you have any such a thing, right? Um, it will deal with uh, like it is having a lot of larger data and it is very hard to go with the rest. There will be a possibility in the CRM also to go with the rest, but limited modules will be available to you. But when it comes to larger, like some data points, right? Like specific to some product catalogs or something. In right in that case, it will be SOAP is required. Like when you are trying to fetch a larger and larger amount of data, right? REST will fail. It will not accept.
Okay. So in general, basically in the RP domain, basically we work with the REST, right? Not more with the SOAP, right? Or
More we work with the REST, but even the SOAP is also available. Majority of the cases we work with the REST, but the SOAP is also there. It's not like we cannot use SOAP. If you see the Salesforce connector, right, it is built on top of REST only, but that's the reason for which some functionalities are missing because some functionalities we may not implement with the REST. And majority of the APIs, right, this some applications will support both SOAP and REST.
okay.
Okay, and we will be using SOAP UI to explore this. Even Postman also. We have some couple of applications where we can make this API calls working testing. I'll come to there next. And this is slower, faster comparatively. Okay. So these are the very high level references. And to work with SOAP, right, you need to have WSDL file, which will be containing all the endpoints and all. That we call it as WSDL file, subservices description language.
So path it means basically, let's say if we have a last message of our last data, right? So in that case, basically we don't have other choices, right? Only SOAP, right? We have to use the SOAP, right? Or we
Yes, in
can, or
case,
we.
see, it's not about only that.
Mhm.
See, it depends on how the developer define their architecture and the APIs, right? Someone will use REST, someone will use SOAP architecture. So it depends on them.
Okay.
It all depends on the application architecture. Okay. So these are the high level differences. Okay, these are the high level differences between these. See, what applications we have in terms of APIs testing, Postman and SOAP UI. SOAP UI is to test your SOAP APIs, and the Postman will work for both. Let me go to the Postman. This is the application, and we can even access this from the browser also. Let me go to the browser, postman.com. So we can go for this as well. And in case if you want to start with something, right, click on new. Oops, not from here. You can just make, we can select anything, right? If I select this, I'll get something. I think for soap, this will work or not. I'm not pretty sure, guys. I don't want to commit anything. I'm not pretty sure whether we can have it or not. Okay. So we will be giving all the parameters and we will test it in the Postman. See, why we will be going with this is, let us suppose you doesn't know with something. Let us suppose Salesforce. You can see the Salesforce APIs directly here, and you can explore this, how it works and all, right? So you can see all this, how it is working and all. Okay. So like you can explore the APIs in case if you doesn't know something. You can see all the details. We'll come to each and everything later stage. So we can use the Postman. And for SOAP, we'll be using SOAP UI. And for API documentation, we need to have endpoints, right? That we will be looking into the API documentation. There will be open AI collaboration will be there. For that, we will be having Swagger files. In Swagger, right, we can directly test it directly on the documentation itself. Let us come back to here. These are the Swaggers, right? So let's go back. For UiPath, right, we will be having Swagger files. So Swagger, we can directly test some here and all. We can make the things work. Like example, you will be having it here. Okay. And we can directly click on try it out. Okay. So these are the different components or different applications or different types and all these things we will be having in APIs. Okay. So except how to make the API calls, are we clear with all the other things?
Yes, Path, yeah.
Ashok and Ravindra.
Yeah, Pav.
Yes, Path. Good.
Okay, cool. And
Uh,
now,
Path, basically, somewhere basically I read like so basically needs more bandwidth, right,
yes,
for its usage
yes,
as compared to the
yes.
rest. So
See,
basically, what is the meaning of
simple,
that?
simple, with high bandwidth in the sense because you are trying to call a larger messages, right? So
Okay.
it will take time to get the response back, right? So it's slower,
Mhm.
long, high bandwidth in the sense like you need to have a stable or very good high-speed internet network, and your server should be your whatever the server where you are hosting, right? That should be with a very high performance, and all these things needs to be required. High bandwidth
Okay.
in the sense like it will be dealing with the larger messages, and the response will be slower, right? Which means like you need
Correct.
to have
Correct.
consistent. And when you are making the API calls, right? Like generally we will be getting a couple of errors. Uh, Let us go for the errors, expected errors. timeout. When server is taking too long time than the defined or expected, then you'll get this error. So nowadays we are getting very less unless and until it could not able to reach the server. The reason is now the people are going with the synchronization, async. Don't ask me this because I also doesn't know. I'll use this call keyword. That's it. I don't know that as well. Okay. And unauthorized. You will get this unauthorization error majority of the cases when you are first time dealing with those applications, in case if you miss out to follow the documentation or authentication, because this can be because of few reasons. One is incorrect credentials. Okay. And in case your application is only inside your network and you are not connected to that internet, like either you need to be in your office connected to your office internet, or if you're outside you need to have a VPN configured. Though you are putting the correct credentials, you will get this error only. And incorrect credentials, and if yeah, next is invalid URI, which means incorrect endpoint. So these will be scenario like a different errors expected, common errors expected. So you'll be having some other also, but in case as soon as you get some errors, like you just try searching in the Google, so you will get it. Okay. So we covered the expected errors, right? Now let us look into the most common question in your interview side. How did you work on APIs? And let us go back to that questions I mentioned last time, right? First, yeah, explain what activities do you have for API automation. Yeah, ఎక్కడికి ఎప్పుడు రవి అంటే ఎవరు? ఉండాలని వెళ్ళిపో
10 minutes. Meeting.
పర్లేదు.
ఇది ఇటు సైడ్ కూర్చో కొన్ని సామాన్లు తీసేస్తుంది
నువ్వు పట్టుకెళ్తున్నావా?
మనం టీమ్
వస్తున్నారా? వస్తారా? రారు కదా, రవి రారు. ఓకే. So what activities do we have in API automation? And we covered this, what are the different methods, right? And what is the output and response of an API? We covered different methods of authenticating API. We covered everything. So the only question pending is what activities we have in API. So till 2 days back, right? Till few days back, I used to say HTTP request activity, where we will be making API call and getting the response in JSON string, and then we will be deserializing JSON string to JSON object, and we can access the data with JSON nodes. Today, unexpectedly, I'm getting a lot of calls. Never got. Just give me a few more minutes. Sorry, guys. Okay, so we will be doing with JSON, accessing the data with the JSON nodes. This is the answer which I used to give till a week back. This is, even if I covered this session a week back, right? Even I'll stop with this particular point. But now we have another option also, which recently I explored it. Okay. And I spoke to a couple of other folks, MVPs and all, even they are also not aware of it. So we can directly import Postman collection. If see, this is there, right? Whatever we have here, right? This is a Postman collection. We can import the Postman collection or Swagger file, whatever is available for that particular APIs. See, you'll be having either of these two for sure, or WSDL file. WSDL is for SOAP. So if you have either of these three, right, for sure, for any API or for any application, you will be having either of these three. We can directly import these files as a service in library project. Okay? Library project, and all the API methods or endpoints or actions, whatever you call, will be reflected under the activities. Okay, so this is how it will work, but it is applicable only for the library project, not for the normal project. And after doing this library project, we need to build as reusables and publish to orchestrator to get these as drag and drop. Okay. So let me do one thing. See, we will cover the HTTP request activities and all tomorrow, how we are making the API calls and all. But today I'll show you this because this is a very small thing and which is new thing, and still a lot of people are like bit in the confusion state for this. So for that, what we need to do is see in the new project, right? We have different test automation is for the testing of the project, automation testing, and template. You can build your own custom template like similar to these templates, right? RE framework and all. Am I audible, guys? Yeah. And process is to start with your blank process. So library is like to build your reusable components, and we can install them directly in our project. We need to build it as a reusable, and we need to publish that nugget package, and we need to bring that into your UiPath project. And along with the HTTP, I'll show you how we can utilize this package also. And here we'll be using UI API actions. I'm giving the name as UI Bank API access. Create. You see, right? You can see this new service here. Let me go ahead and open any of the project which we created previously. Let me open the API automation, which we covered last session, right? So we don't see that, right? We don't see this new service. So now we have seen this new service, right? Let me go to this. This is my Swagger, right? Explore Swagger file. So we have this JSON format file. Either you can download, save this as a JSON file on your local machine, or else directly you can use this URL. Copy this and come to here, click on new service, just put this link and click on load. all the endpoints we got, right? And we can say we can keep this UI Bank API, click on save. So the service will directly got imported to our activities, and we'll see these activities now. See here, activities category, click on view. Here it is, UI Bank, and he got activity. Okay. So let us drag and drop one particular action. See here, it is under the services. We got under the services. And here, let us go and see create account. So we got all the details. We just need to pass in all the details of this particular API and it will be created. So now instead of doing all the circus of like taking the endpoint and giving all the parameters, right? Automatically it is creating you. You just need to pass in the actual values which is required for this. So for that, we need to go through the documentation for sure. Without going to the documentation, no one can do the API automation. Here we can go to the accounts. We can see create account. Here it is post. If you click here, you will be getting these values, right? So what are the parameters? See example you have. So in the similar way, you just need to come here and we need to provide these actions and then we need to show it out. So this is how we can directly import the service. And you can import the WSDL file, WSDL file, or you can import the Postman collection. So whatever is required, you can import it. And don't focus much on this, but just tell in case if this question is asked, you can just put this so that like they'll think that like you really worked with APIs bit more higher than what they did, because many people knows this. And for this, even this will be good enough if you can explain. Okay. And in terms of theoretical, what else we missed? So response codes. API response codes. For success, it is 200. And error responses will be on 400 series. Like 400 is for bad requests. Bad request in the sense like you could not able to reach that endpoint, or it will not give you a clear picture. Like we didn't pass the proper parameters or right parameters or something. And 401 for unauthorized. So 402 will be like 403 is forbidden, and we will be having a lot, but you can simply say that 200 is your success response, and anything of 400 series or anything other than 200 is an error response. So the success response code is required, and we can just mention this. So are we clear, guys?
Yes, Pathya.
So tomorrow we are going to cover with, yeah, please, someone is saying something.
That's part one question. So, like you mentioned about the second point, right? Library project. That only option we can use with the library project, right? Let's say if you want to,
Yes.
if you want to basically, if you want to build a reusable component, right? Or let's say if you want to use the API calls, right? Then we can only use that that second one, right? Like that
Yeah,
you
and
already.
HTTP request you can use, but I'll tell you to make the HTTP request, right? You need to make a HTTP request. For that, like you need to give the endpoint and you need to put all the details and we need to pass in body parameters and all. But here it is directly giving you this option, right? Just need to, what you need to just need to do is you just need to create all the arguments and you just need to publish this and you can import in your project. We'll see that as well. We'll see that tomorrow. Even this also, like how we can make this as a reusable component instead of like having this HTTP and making all the circus, right? This will directly help you. And it is like
Correct.
for, yeah, it's kind of like a custom activity you are going to get. Yeah, we will see that also, like how we can do.
Okay, sure.
Okay, anything guys? Any questions? Tomorrow I